This is Defiance Daily Dispatches for the Defiant. I am your host, Miles Taylor. I am back from the mountains and ready to talk to you today about everything that is happening inside Donald Trump's corrupt administration. First, we're going to start today with the breaking news that Donald Trump has decided to open an investigation into another one of his enemies. The only person that might be, in a perverse way, hardened by this is me, and only because the club of people he has targeted has grown bigger. But for every other reason, no one should be heartened by this information. We're going to tell you about that investigation, what we know so far, and what we think is going to happen next. And then today we're going to update you on Donald Trump's negotiations with Iran. And I'm going to give you the bottom line up front. We are talking about humiliation at historic scale because it sounds like the Trump administration found there was no way out of this war that Donald Trump started other than pure and total capitulation. And then finally today, we're going to talk about recent reporting that the Trump administration had indeed been actively considering the cancellation of one of your most important constitutional rights. This is not exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. Some would call it fascism. We will tell you what that is today, and we've got the best guest to break it down with us. The incredible Glenn Kirschner will be with us today on the program to talk about that story and more. Now, before we jump in, let me just say, friends, I tell you this all the time, but you get told to like and share and subscribe on the internet. This is one of those cases where it actually makes a difference. We're not some corporate juggernaut that's trying to sell you shampoo. We are a group of people trying to save our democracy in the most dangerous moment it's faced in the modern era. So when you like and share and subscribe to these videos, you are helping us make that happen. But much more importantly, go check out defiance.org and consider joining the Club for Courageous Americans. We exist to answer the question, what can I do to fight back against Donald Trump's abuses of power? And that's what we do every single week. Now, I want to bring in my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz, who I have not seen in a few days because I've been out of pocket. Hi, buddy boy. How are you?
What's happening? Now, I want the audience to know if they do want Defiance.org shampoo, if that's what it'll take to fund the movement, we'll figure out a way to make them some shampoo. It's not out of the question.
I was just approving our updated privacy policy, and I was like, there needs to be a sentence at the beginning, like, what do you think we're doing with the data here? Like, we're not building a shampoo brand. Like, we're fighting corruption, damn it. Like, you know, people need to know that. So anyway, you may see that line pop up somewhere else. But Xander, I want to start us today with this breaking news this afternoon, because folks started the day talking about the absurd and disgusting spectacle at the White House on Sunday. But Monday turned into something very, very different. We went from idiocracy yesterday to autocracy once again today. And I'll tell you why. And that's because Gavin Newsom, the California governor, reported to the public today that he believes he is now joining a club that seems to be getting bigger by the week. And that club consists, of course, of people who have publicly challenged Donald Trump and then found themselves dealing with Donald Trump's Justice Department, found themselves under federal investigation. And this afternoon, Newsom announced that federal agents had been contacting people connected to both he and his wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom. Now, according to reporting from the New York Times, agents have spent the last week questioning former Newsom employees and family associates and people connected to several of his wife's nonprofit organizations. Now, the Times reports that one of the inquiries appears focused on Jennifer Siebel Newsom's finances. Specifically, investigators have been asking questions about those nonprofits, including the Representation Project and the California Partners Project. Now, both organizations, by the way, have existed for a very long time. They've existed for years. And the California Partners Project alone has raised millions and millions of dollars from corporations and foundations and other groups, including some with allegedly business before the state. Now, critics have periodically raised questions about those relationships, but the Times notes that there's no public evidence of wrongdoing that has surfaced. Now, Newsom argues that this is a politically motivated investigation being driven by Donald Trump's Justice Department. Meanwhile, a source familiar with the matter told the Times that multiple federal investigations involving Newsom are underway, that originated with federal law enforcement officials in California rather than officials in Washington. Now, this is allegedly according to this source familiar with the investigation. According to Gavin Newsom's office, however, the newest round of inquiries began around the same time that Todd Blanche was elevated to lead the Justice Department. Interesting coincidence. This afternoon, Newsom responded publicly. Xander, take a listen.
In days, federal agents have knocked on the doors of family, friends, and former employees. Not because they found a crime, because they're simply trying to find one. They're demanding records. They're abusing the grand jury process, digging through years and years of random documents. Donald Trump isn't just coming after me because of my mean tweets. He's coming after me because I'm considering running for president, because he hates that I've consistently called him out over and over again for his lies and deceit. Donald Trump is simply the most corrupt president in American history. He's turned the levers of government into his own personal power ministries to reward.
I gotta say, Xander, the line there that you have to remember is him pointing out the corruption piece. Okay.
Yeah.
And Newsom spent much of the rest of that statement talking about corruption and the Trump administration. And it was pretty well timed that this happened on Monday, because yesterday the White House basically made the argument for him, right? Because during last night's UFC event on the White House lawn, viewers watching the broadcast saw this.
Captioning for tonight's broadcast is brought to you by TrumpCoins.com, the official UFC Freedom 250 special edition medallions graded by NGC. Limited quantities available now at TrumpCoins.com.
What?
If you were wondering up until now, if you thought the Newsom investigation was getting up to the bottom of corruption in politics, you haven't been paying attention. Clearly not a priority for these guys.
I don't even know where to start. Todd Blanche and his flunkies are poking around, apparently with multiple investigations into Gavin Newsom. They're trying to find something. They're trying to find a thread of a thing, and literally an opportunity to investigate the president of the United States was just aired across the networks
as a commercial, as like a live commercial. Is crazy, dude.
I couldn't think of that being in. I mean, maybe in a farcical film. You would have a version of that was like,
I mean, you said Idiocracy earlier. Like, that's the only, it has to be that wild. What was it called? Brondo? What was the Gatorade?
Totally.
They're putting in the plants, Brondo. It's basically Brondo, but if the president had owned Brondo.
Donald Trump held a sporting event on official federal property owned by taxpayers, used the event to advertise a private product with his name on it. You guys, it doesn't get more corrupt than that. I don't give a shit what they find out the Newsoms did or didn't do or make up that they did. This is blatant corruption. And Donald Trump, of course, is trying to detract from it. But that advertisement, Xander, was only part of the story, because according to reporting from The Guardian, the UFC announced on Friday that fighters competing at the White House event would be eligible for a new $250,000 performance bonus pool. But the bonus would not be paid in cash. Do you know what it would be paid in? It would be paid in USD1. USD1.
That's right.
Which is the stable coin issued by World Liberty Financial, which is the cryptocurrency company founded by the Trump family and the family of Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. You can't make this
shit
shit
up.
Up.
Transaction fees.
You cannot make this up. At one point, Trump was publicly listed by the company as its chief crypto advocate. Now he's on a detour as president of the United States, but that's not stopping him, apparently, from making sure that his businesses get rich off of the taxpayer. Now, World Liberty wasn't just supplying the bonuses. Much like TrumpCoins.com, the company was also listed as an official sponsor of the event itself. And according to Trump's latest financial disclosure, he reported holdings worth more than $50 million in the company. Now, the White House says there's no conflict here because Trump's assets are held in a trust managed by his children. But critics, of course, point to a very simple fact that a fighter bonus could have been paid in cash. It didn't have to be paid in USD1.
I thought it's always USD1.
Xander, I managed to get through every day using cash or credit card and not using Trump coins. So you can't think that this was just a coincidence. And instead, the UFC made a conscious effort here, of course, to pair this fight at the Trump White House with the Trump family brand. And all right there on the people's lawn, the South Lawn, which does not belong to Donald Trump, that belongs to us. And I got to say, this is like the political equivalent of somebody showing up to a potluck and eating everyone else's food and then handing out coupons for their own restaurant. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a pretty good metaphor. It is interesting. You've got to appreciate their commitment to grifting, that it happens at every scale. Like, say you and I were grifters and we had one plan where we were trying to get $10 billion of taxpayer money. And then there was another plan where we were going to get transaction fees on $250,000 of like fighter payouts. We probably wouldn't give that second plan much time. But these guys, it lets you know how like completely unafraid they are of being held accountable to any of this. Like the commercials, like doing grifts on every level. It's so interesting. I do think that we've got to, I don't know. There's like this tension all the time with these types of stories where it's like the more important thing isn't whether Newsom did what they're accusing him of doing. The more important thing is it's politically motivated. That this didn't come from some directive at the top law enforcement agency to go figure out where corruption is happening in politics, root it out, and clean up our system, right? That's not what's going on. And sometimes there can be tension between making that important point and defending a system or an institution or an old guard politician who probably is, you know, that the thing they're talking about with Newsom is he wouldn't be the first person to do that, to use his philanthropy to build relationships and like all this stuff gets intertwined, right? And so our politics does have to get cleaned up. I hope, you know, Miles, you and I are a big part of that for the rest of our lives, not just in this fight, but clearly, you know, Gavin said it best. He's being targeted because he's running for president.
Well, look, as the saying goes, the accusation is the admission. I mean, this administration keeps accusing its opponents of grift and corruption, but that's an admission. That's exactly what they are doing, Xander. And this is, you know, this UFC fight was one of the most brazen examples of it we have ever seen. And I'll say one last thing on this before we jump to our next story, which is there are a number of other people, and I mentioned this last week, a number of other people who I believe are imminently going to be indicted by the Trump administration. Innocent people who are being targeted purely because they have criticized Donald Trump. Now, Xander and I can joke about it, but we cannot get complacent with this, folks. Is as big of an indicator that you are now living in an autocracy than a democracy, is that the president is unilaterally directing his Justice Department to go after his enemies, which they are doing. I don't need to spell it out for you. It doesn't have to do with Trump or Obama. Any president that does that is committing an obviously facially unconstitutional act. It is fundamentally unconstitutional for the president of the United States to direct selective and vindictive prosecutions, and that appears to be happening across the board at the U.S. Department of Justice under Todd Blanche. And you know what? We're not going to sit on our hands. This organization exists to fight it. So some of those people who are likely to be indicted by this administration on sham charges are going to be defended, not just by me and Xander, but the army of the defiant in the United States. And they're going to have a lot more reason to be pissed off, Xander, because our second story is about how the president's not just selling the White House lawn, apparently, to the highest bidder or to his favorite sports organizations. He's just selling out the United States, and not just to anyone, but to a country that just months ago he went to war with, a country that he said he was going to try to replace with a different regime and make less dangerous to the world. That country is Iran. And after Donald Trump's birthday weekend, he had to hop his tired 80-year-old self onto a plane to do some actual work. But that actual work after the fight isn't really delivering results, because now Donald Trump is over in Europe and having to defend what appears to be a humiliating Iran deal to America's international partners. Donald Trump is over in Europe for the G7 meetings as news hits this week that he just struck a deal with Iran that is hardly different than the deal he spent years attacking and threw out the window, Xander. Here's the only difference. Donald Trump threw out that promise from the Iranians not to build nuclear weapons, and now is striking a similar agreement that's reportedly going to cost billions and billions and billions of dollars. The administration says, however, that this agreement with Iran will reopen the Strait of Hormuz and eliminate Iran's pathway to a nuclear weapon and transfer Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium and subject the country to routine inspections. But again, Xander, the problem is that nobody has actually seen this deal yet, and the full text won't be released until later this week. And as officials begin describing what's in it, some familiar questions are starting to emerge. Namely, over the weekend, former President Barack Obama, who sat down with Robin Roberts, offered a pretty blunt assessment based on what he has heard.
How do you think things are being handled right now there?
It is doubtful that any agreement that arises is going to be significantly different or a significant improvement from the deal that we had in the first place, and had worked for a long stretch of time before the United States pulled out of it. So I'm hopeful that bombing stops and ordinary people are no longer suffering as a consequence of the war. And then in retrospect, it's a reminder that on a lot of difficult foreign policy problems, the notion that we can just bully our way or bomb our way to solutions may sometimes seem appealing, but the fact of the matter is that taking the time to explore diplomacy and exhaust the possibilities of coming up with deals that don't solve 100% of the problem, but solve 80, 90% of the problem, while avoiding the necessity of going to war. You'd think we would have learned that lesson by now, but it seems like every so often we have to relearn that lesson again.
Yeah, you'd think we could have learned that lesson by now.
Miles, he was clearly just speaking to one person, like no regular American. It was like preferring military action over more diplomatic interventions. It was framed as advice to everyone, but that was clearly to one guy being like, the more boring diplomatic bureaucratic interventions are the better ones. We've known that for a while. Can you imagine, Miles, a world where there's some sort of Iran nuclear deterrent and the Strait of Hormuz is open? Can you see such a world, or was it just 6 months ago that that world completely existed and we decided to tear it up?
Completely existed. I mean, look. So, well, I want to give you my thoughts really quickly. I want to play what JD Vance said this morning because as more details have started to emerge about this, things are getting even fishier. Take a listen. We'll talk on the back end.
Some of this, the Iranians are saying that they're going to have access to a $300 billion reconstruction fund. True or false?
Well, Ed, that's the sort of thing they could have access to, funded by the Gulf Coast Coalition, so long as they honor their end of the obligation. I think that one of the things you're going to see, Ed, and people have to be skeptical of this, is that the hardliners in the Iranian system will overemphasize the benefits that Iran gets while underemphasizing all the things that they have to concede and all the things they have to provide in order to get these benefits. So
make the case, JD. You're right there. What do we get?
Guys, I need you to focus on that number. a $300 billion reconstruction fund. All right. I was on with our friend Stephanie Rule on MS Now this morning talking about the reporting around this deal. And it was shocking enough that those early reports this morning were that Iran might get a $24 billion slush fund in unfrozen assets, okay, which would be more than 10 times the $1.7 billion deal that the Obama administration struck, right? So we got a promise from Iran. We will not develop a nuclear bomb during the Obama years. And that promise was backed up with a trade of some unfrozen assets. And people on my side of the aisle at the time, Xander, the Republican Party, went apoplectic at that amount of money. Okay, then this morning...
Wait, Miles, can I pause you for 1 second? Just as a reminder, that money was also from like a 1979 deal that Iran was disputing was never fulfilled. It's not like that came from nowhere. It was just Iran had been disputing that this deal was unfulfilled. And he said, fine, if you do the nuclear deterrent thing, I'll side with you in that debate over, if we should fulfill our part of that deal.
Well, and now we're talking about the Trump administration not only unfreezing more than 10 times that amount in Iranian assets, but potentially giving them 200 times that amount in a construction fund. All right. Remember, America, you're the ones paying higher gas prices because of Donald Trump, higher prices across the board. Your healthcare costs have gone up. Everything is more expensive. And the country Donald Trump has just been bombing, he's proposing giving a $300 billion reconstruction fund too. And Xander, we're not the only ones that are losing our minds about this. Republican senators are freaking out about this.
I'm sure they're
conservative commentators. A man that I used to work with, Mark Thiessen, who works at the American Enterprise Institute and is often featured on Fox News, not exactly a member of the resistance, totally blew this up. Thiessen called the reconstruction proposal, quote, a disaster, and compared it to offering the Marshall Plan to Germany while the Nazis were still in power. Remember the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. But what if we didn't rebuild our allies' countries? We instead
he beat me to the punch. We haven't had the regime change. We haven't had the regime change before doing this. Nothing happened. It's the same guys in charge. It's crazy. Sorry, Miles. Go ahead.
No, I mean it is crazy. And you pair with that the fact that Donald Trump now somehow has to go sell this to America's allies. He just arrived at the G7 summit in France. He's going to be sitting down with Emmanuel Macron, and he reminded him why Obama's deal was bad in the first place. It's because Iran got billions of dollars. Take a look.
So we had two big moments when they terminated the JCPOA, that was the Obama deal, the Barack Hussein Obama deal. And when I terminated that, it was very important because it was a road to a nuclear weapon. It was a horrible deal for the United States. It was a deal where billions of dollars was given to Iran. It was a deal where 1.7 billion in cash was put on a Boeing 757, I guess, right? But it was put on a big, beautiful Boeing 757. They needed a Boeing 747, to be honest with you, because it was a lot of cash.
I had to go put my Defiance hat on because if for some reason you're the random person that wandered into this live stream, unsure if you had any reasons to defy the sociopath in the White House, hopefully you now have it. He was just now, like moments ago, Donald Trump was criticizing the Obama administration for flying cash in to give to the Iranians to get a nuclear deal. And Trump and his allies have allegedly negotiated a final deal with Iran that would give it hundreds of times as much money as the Obama administration did to get its deal in order to get the same promise back from Iran. I'm out. I got no more. I got no words. I'm stuck.
He has successfully. It's incredible. Every time we kind of run into one of these moments, we go, "This is the biggest scandal, presidential history." his new high watermark does make you forget about past scandals. Like, he gave Argentina $40 billion out of nowhere. We're not entirely sure why. The Make America First guy did. Someone just brought it up in our comments. I want to give credit where credit's due. And that feels, now he's made that feel like small chump change. Now he's offering $300 billion to Iran. It's
not chump change, it's Trump change. And I think you're right. It seems like the president is hell-bent on outdoing himself in how significant the volume of corruption is. I mean, we spent 2 weeks talking about the $1.776 billion slush fund he wanted to create, a cash for criminals program. And now we're talking about $300 billion that he wants to help unlock for one of the most murderous regimes in the world that he was just bombing because he said we had to get rid of them. And what are we getting in exchange? The same promise that we had that they won't develop a nuclear weapon, and the Strait of Hormuz being reopened, and it was already opened. You cannot say anything other than that this is the single biggest diplomatic blunder in American history if it gets inked. In size, in scope, in sheer stupidity. And you know what? You don't need to hear it from me. Donald Trump's own allies, like Mark Thiessen, who's been a consistent Trump bootlicker, are now realizing there's no way they can defend this deal.
Miles, if you're a candidate coming into these generals and you're in a district with military members, this is ammo. This is ammo for you. Like, he won on the backs of a lot of members of the global war on terror that said, I don't know what that was all about. I'd never want our country to do that again. I don't want other young men to be sent to places like that under pretenses that don't make sense. This is, you know, and we're always thinking like this, like, we don't want to just be horrified by today's news. We know Trump's corrupt. He's going to keep doing corrupt things. How do we use this? Any independent candidates that ran on No More Forever Wars, anyone that's in districts where that was a strong narrative, and there's many across this country, should be hammering this. This is an opportunity coming into the midterms.
Look, I think the ads write themselves. I think the ads completely write themselves because Donald Trump is rewarding one of the most murderous regimes on the planet. I mean, I love Thiessen's analogy of this would be like if we gave the Nazis, you know, a giant multi-billion-dollar gift while they were still in power. That's what this is. But I think the ads write themselves. And more importantly, I think we have yet another reason to investigate Donald Trump's administration, because this deal stinks. This deal is really, really questionable. And here's what I want you to focus on. And I've heard no one talking about this yet. I want you to focus on what that reconstruction money is supposedly for, because there are folks out there who've been alluding to Jared Kushner and others saying, well, maybe if we stop bombing the Iranians, we can start collaborating with them on building, on redevelopment.
So sound familiar?
What promises were made in secret? And I'll tell you, a lot of people, a lot of regular folks don't know this, is that a lot of deals that are struck with foreign countries between the United States, they often have confidential terms, right, that aren't disclosed to the public. When the Obama administration cut the deal to create the Obama nuclear deal, there were allegedly non-public agreements made with Iran to make the deal go through. We'll give you this, you give us this, and then we'll announce the broader public deal. I want to know, Xander, what things are we not being told about this $300 billion development fund? Do you really think Donald Trump, lifelong real estate developer, is helping to bring to life a $300 billion development fund, which would be one of the largest development funds on the face of the globe, but has no interest in being a part of it? This stinks to high hell. And to talk about something else that stinks, we're going to go to our final story of the day, which we're going to talk about with our guest who's going to be joining us shortly. And that is some pretty shocking reporting that came out this weekend. And it didn't get nearly enough attention given the UFC fight and the other things that were happening. Somehow we are living in the craziest timeline where a story like this ends up being page 2 news. And buried inside a major New York Times investigation this morning was a remarkable revelation. According to confidential White House memos obtained by the Times, senior Trump administration officials spent months debating whether the president of the United States could suspend one of the oldest constitutional protections in American history. We're talking about what is called habeas corpus, the right that allows someone detained by the government to stand before a judge and force the government to explain why they are being held. In other words, if you've been arrested, to know why you have been arrested. One of the oldest protections in American law, and in practical terms, it's what prevents the government from locking people up and telling them, hey, you'll get an explanation later. We can lock you up for whatever we want to, and we don't have to tell you, right? That's what separates us from a complete despotism. According to the New York Times, the discussion gained momentum after the Supreme Court ruled that migrants being deported under the Alien Enemies Act still had the right to challenge their removal in court. Now, this decision slowed down the administration's deportation efforts and created an opening for Stephen Miller, who began pushing a more aggressive idea. What if the administration, what if the president simply suspended habeas corpus? That way, migrants could be picked up off the street and sent out of the country without ever giving a chance to sit in front of a judge or challenge the fact that they had been picked up by the government. Now, thankfully, there seemed to be quasi-adults in the room, and one White House aide wrote a memo saying that, a confidential memo to the chief of staff of the White House with a straightforward subject line: the writ of habeas corpus. Basically, a backgrounder on why this would not be legal or constitutional. Now, the author of that is the White House staff secretary, a man named Will Scharf, who's not some never Trump Republican. He's a lawyer who has helped Donald Trump develop some of his most egregious policies. Yet, according to the Times, Scharf warned that the Constitution permits suspension of habeas corpus only in cases of rebellion or invasion, and that the courts have consistently held that Congress and not the president has the authority to do it. He reminded those White House officials, like the chief of staff, in other words, that doing what Stephen Miller wanted to do would probably be illegal. Now, the Times reports that Trump himself was interested in the proposal of suspending habeas corpus. He asked advisors about Abraham Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War, which I got to tell you, Xander, is probably something he had planted in his head. That's not the type of thing that Donald Trump knows off the cuff. Meanwhile, Stephen Miller directed the Justice Department to study the issue. Some officials inside the administration reportedly described the proposal as, quote, insane. Others worried it would trigger a constitutional showdown that the administration was unlikely to win. Now, the proposal never became policy, but reading through that reporting, Xander, what struck me was not the outcome. It was the fact that senior White House lawyers were spending their time writing confidential memos, having to explain the most basic elements of the United States Constitution. Now, the same reporting reveals that administration officials were also debating whether to invoke the Insurrection Act, something we've talked about many times on this program. Yet another abuse of power that Donald Trump was considering carrying out. Now, here to help us break all of this down is one of our favorite legal eagles, former federal prosecutor and host of Justice Matters, Mr. Glenn Kirschner, who I think, Xander, is actually trying to get his camera working. So he's got to be with us in just a second. But I have to say, this story is something that we wrote about this morning. And it was not unknown to the world that this was being considered. This was publicly floated by Stephen Miller last year. There were rumblings last year that they were talking about suspending habeas. At the time, Xander, you had these Republicans in Congress and others who they always want to say, well, Trump is just joking and his aides are just joking. And they're not really talking about doing this, right? They write those things off until we find out, no, they were as serious as a heart attack. And in
Who
this
knew
case,
the just joking
they were.
excuse that you would give your teacher in 7th grade is like the administrative byline. Like, you know, on every one of these things, it's what they go to. Oh, we were just clowning around talking about suspending your fundamental rights. It's like how I got out of trouble when I was 12. It's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. And you cannot think of a more fundamental aspect than this. Let me take listeners and viewers back in time. One of the reasons that the colonies separated from Great Britain was because the king was detaining people without justification, detaining people without cause, detaining people and not letting them submit a writ of habeas corpus to challenge their detention. It's one of the reasons that this country exists. And now we've got an administration willing to consider its suspension. And with us to talk about that, and I think his camera and audio is now working, is our legal eagle friend, Mr. Glenn Kirschner.
Glenn, what's up, big guy?
Glenn, you got us.
We've got him, but he hasn't got us.
Oh.
This is actually Glenn Kirschner reading hour. We just watch him read his favorite novel. Glenn, what's going on?
Glenn, can you hear us? Oh, man, that could have been...
It's a new segment we've been working on. It's your favorite Substack influencers reading quietly.
Defiance.org sponsors The Truman Show with Glenn Kirschner, where we follow him through his day. We watch him working at his desk and eating in the evenings, driving his car. Which, by the way,
speaking of shows we should produce, what were you gonna say? Go ahead. Sir.
Well, no, I was hoping you were going the same direction. I've been thinking they need to do a reboot of The Truman Show. I'm not usually a big fan of reboots, but that's one that should be rebooted. I know that's neither here nor there, but I would certainly watch a Truman Show version with Glenn Kirschner, who might be back with us. Let's give it a test drive.
We got Glenn one more time. Let's see it.
Maybe
not. All right,
Glenn, can you hear us?
Kirschner?
Gentlemen, I have been having a hell of a time since after trying to, I am so incompetent. I can't even spell IT. That's how bad I am.
Glenn, don't worry about it. You're in the amateur section of the Substack universe, so you're fine. You're hanging out with your buddies over here.
Yeah. We're
happy to have
friendly
you.
territory, man. We have a technical difficulty every 5 minutes, and it's because of me and Xander. And we see our producer like facepalm in the corner. But it's great to have you with us, my friend. I got to ask you out of the gate. I mean, Glenn, you and I talked about this a year ago, but this speculation of the Trump administration wanting to suspend habeas corpus was given much more form with this Jonathan Swan, Maggie Haberman report. I want to get your reaction to it because it's so hard these days to help folks understand how serious it is. But this is about as serious as it gets to have the president of the United States thinking about unilaterally opening the doors to arresting anyone. I mean, this could have hypothetically and still could hypothetically allow the president to pick up anyone off the street, not give them a reason why, and stick them in jail.
There's a reason that the writ of habeas corpus is called the Great Writ, because it protects everyone against our own government, abuse, lawlessness, unconstitutionality. Loosely translated, it commands the government to produce the body of the person you are imprisoning, produce the body to the court so the court can determine whether the person is being lawfully or unlawfully confined, constitutionally or unconstitutionally imprisoned. Now, it's not often successful, the Great Writ, the writ of habeas corpus. And I think maybe the last time that I can recall it being successful is when Michael Cohen brought the Great Writ because he, it turns out, was being unconstitutionally imprisoned by his own government because he had the audacity of saying that, he was thinking about writing a book about dear leader. So, and it was a federal judge in New York who ordered his release based on the writ of habeas corpus. If Trump was successful in suspending the writ of habeas corpus, the good news is it is not an Article 2 power. It's an Article 1 power, and it really takes an act of Congress. But let's set that aside, because when does Donald Trump have the time of day for such, constitutional nuances, like which article actually permits him to do something? I think if he tried to do it, it would probably be instantly shot down by a federal trial court, a court of appeals, even the Supreme Court. Because when I talk, Miles and Xander, about how the federal judiciary has been holding strong, primarily the trial court judges and the courts of appeals, I always, hasten to add, but the Supreme Court, and we always have to talk about, what the corrupt radical right-wing majority, the compromised majority on the Supreme Court, might do when it comes to expanding presidential power beyond the text of the Constitution. I don't think they would have the time of day for it. I mean, I've got my handy pocket Constitution. I never leave home without it. And the writ of habeas corpus, that power, that authority, is found in Article 1. And it's a very short section. It simply says, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. And if there is an armed rebellion, if there is an armed invasion, then it is a congressional power, not an executive branch power. But, Miles, ever since I heard you talk early and often about some of Donald Trump's other ruminations, like why can't we just shoot pregnant women coming across the border? Is there any constitutional abuse, rule of law abuse, or human rights abuse that is a bridge too far for Donald Trump? I don't think so.
Glenn, I was going to read off a couple of the other moments when habeas corpus has been suspended in this country. Nationwide, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln briefly suspended it. And more specifically, during Reconstruction era, when Grant was fighting the KKK, and after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Do you feel like we're living in a moment adjacent to one of those moments? What do you think?
We are living in a moment when the Constitution is in crisis every minute.
That is the crisis
of every day. But it is not courtesy of an invasion or a rebellion or an attack on the United States, except an attack, by our own president and his corrupt executive branch. But that is not really what is contemplated, by that would authorize the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. But, we are in crisis. Right. There's no doubt we're in crisis.
That's right.
But not the kind of crisis that would, necessitate the suspension of the great writ.
I mean, what's interesting is even in those examples that Xander cites, in several of those examples, the Supreme Court later struck down the attempt to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. So it's not like these were all successful episodes where it was legitimately done. I mean, Abraham Lincoln's hand was slammed shut in the cookie jar, and Congress had to sort of, after the fact, play cleanup for him, even during the Civil War, and pass a law because the court said, no, Lincoln, the president, doesn't have the ability to do this. Only Congress does. And in the same case with Pearl Harbor, as you mentioned, Xander, of course, the court famously struck down a number of the policies that were used to intern the Japanese that were derived from the attempted suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. So there's not a lot of case law that shows that even in the legitimate uses of it, as prescribed by the Constitution, that it has been used legitimately. So, I mean, this just gets us almost as far afield as the Constitution we could get. And Glenn, as you were talking about all the different ways in which the president has gone after the U.S. Constitution, I'm sort of desiring a visual, depiction of the U.S. Constitution and all the pieces and clauses that are now on fire, because I think we would see half that document on fire right now. We're not just talking about onesies or twosies. I mean, I think the majority of the Bill of Rights has been attacked in some way, shape, or form by this administration.
And there has been little to no consequence for it. There were lots of reforms that were enacted in the aftermath of Watergate and what Nixon and his criminal cabal did. And I hope that we're going to both, seek accountability against all of the folks in the Trump administration who are just victimizing the American people and documented immigrants and undocumented immigrants and visitors to our country. And, one, there has to be accountability. And two, there has to be some reforms put in place, because this is what really irks the shit out of me. Donald Trump is acting lawlessly and unconstitutionally early and often, dating to the very first day of his second term, when he signed a, quote, blatantly unconstitutional attempted revocation of the right of birthright citizenship. And he really hasn't let up. And it's great that the courts are holding strong for the most part and saying, no, this is unlawful. This is unconstitutional. This is unlawful. This is unconstitutional. But he's already 3 more unconstitutional executive orders down the road. And there's no flippant accountability for all of his lawlessness and his unconstitutionality. That has to change. There has to be consequences for anybody in the executive branch, up to and including a president, who is intentionally and knowingly signing these unconstitutional executive orders. Because if you don't hold them accountable, then what is to deter the next aspiring dictator from doing all that and then some? That's why I say, look, we blew accountability in 74. We blew accountability in 2021. If we blow accountability a third time, I don't think we get to keep our republic, not hyperbole. And you know what? I don't know that we deserve to keep our republic. But let me jump to a point of light, because I have a feeling that Trump's criminal associates, his executive branch officials who were committing crimes together with and for the benefit of Donald Trump back during the Watergate era, I will bet they felt bulletproof, right? Beyond the reach of the law. The president's got all that. And when Richard Nixon fell from power, 48 of them were criminally convicted and 30 of them went to prison. And I know there are 2 other numbers that we're always talking about, 86, 47. None, I don't care about those. That case is going to get tossed. I care about 48 and 30. I've got that up on my wall. Believe right here. Believe, because I hope those numbers pale in comparison to what we have to undertake beginning in January 2029.
Glenn, you talk about accountability. There's accountability, after this is all over, holding these guys accountable, but it does seem like procedurally there needs to be something like a suspension of the ability to just issue executive orders without the court's approval. If you have a track record at some point that you don't have a good grasp over your powers, we keep defaulting.
Can we put him on constitutional probation?
That's what there needs to be a probation. Be like, you clearly
a constitutional ankle bracelet or something, and every time he tries to sign something that's he gets a little shock. It's like something. We got to do something.
We're joking around, but there's so much damage done between the time Trump issues one of these EOs and then by the time the courts catch up, and oftentimes you can't put that genie back in the bottle. Right. And so I'm wondering, like, in terms of interventions we should be pushing for, is that one? It's like after, you get a yellow card, then you get a red card. Okay, you don't understand your powers. The courts have to, it can be fast tracked, but the court's got to approve it first before you get issued another EO.
It makes perfect sense what you're suggesting. Now, listen, I like the Constitution, and, I bristle a little bit when I hear, we have to have some kind of another branch of government checking
it's a good point.
Orders being signed by the president. I mean, that's not our constitutional construct, but I think it makes sense in the era of Trump. But I think what you have to do, there's something else that I've been proposing since the first Trump administration, and it is an accelerated court docket. I call it the Intercourt Dispute Branch, the IDBC. And this is entirely doable, believe it or not. It doesn't take an act of Congress. It simply takes a rule change by the courts themselves. We have all kinds of specialized dockets in this country. Yeah. We have domestic violence courts. We have drug courts. We have mental health courts. We have, all kinds of specialized courts that are tailored to the particular case. So we can have an interbranch dispute court. And, remember how they were trying to enforce a subpoena against White House counsel? Was it Pat Cipollone in the first term? And they ran that thing out in court for more than 2 years, and it never did come to fruition. They negotiated a half-assed resolution that basically left the American people high and dry, in my opinion. But I've talked to judges. I said, Why can't we have an interbranch dispute court, a specialized docket rather, where, okay, there is, this butting of the heads between co-equal branches of government, and there's a legal challenge filed. You get 2 weeks to file your reply brief. 2 weeks down after that, you have your argument. And then 2 weeks after the argument, you get a decision, 6 weeks. Done. You want to appeal it? 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Done.
Get it done.
Why in the hell can't we learn our lesson, from letting Trump engage in this illegality and then just run it out with no consequence when the court finally, a couple of years down the road, says, you know what? You weren't allowed to do that in the first place.
Totally.
Glenn, that's a reform I could get behind. And I also have to say, I'm with you on the good news piece, on the Article 3 courts, because one of the things that we have found, I mean, the majority of all the money raised by Defiance.org goes straight to organizations who are helping in the fight. And one of the most popular organizations or types of organizations our members want us to fund are organizations that are suing the administration. And we have financially backed the lawsuits to get Donald Trump's name taken off the Kennedy Center and lawsuits against Donald Trump's unconstitutional birthright citizenship executive order, which will likely be struck down this month, and lawsuits against his obviously unconstitutional mail-in ballots executive order that could affect the midterm elections, and on down the list, as we have been making sure that they are held accountable in the courts. And we have a question from one of our Defiance.org members in the chat for you. Christy H. asks about that first one I mentioned, Glenn, the Kennedy Center, and says, do you think they will ever take down the TARP, or will there need to be more legal action? Because, of course, Donald Trump and his team are going to find every stupid way to evade a judge's decision. Now, I haven't looked online to see if there's still the TARP up in front of the Kennedy Center or not, but I assume we've not been given the opportunity to see the building without his name.
Not only is the TARP up, but they have cut out two spaces in the TARP for the doors so people can now go in and out, suggesting that it's going to remain up for a while. But you know what? He thinks he can hide his humiliation. He's like a child who thinks he can cover his eyes and say, nobody can see me. Dude, we know what's behind the TARP.
Looks worse.
Off the building. We know, and you're trying to hide your humiliation, but you're not fooling anyone. I mean, and I think the headline in the Republic today was that he's also humiliated in the Middle East, courtesy of this latest, alleged memorandum of understanding and ceasefire and blah, 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 the 39th ceasefire, I think. And his humiliation stretches from Washington, D.C. to the Middle East and beyond. He's not fooling anybody. So we know what's behind the TARP. It's an open question as to whether there is a well-placed legal challenge to requiring that TARP to be pulled down so we can again see John F. Kennedy's name displayed. But you know what? It makes him small and weak and fearful is all it does by leaving that TARP up. You did see there was a really intrepid photographer who took a picture between the edge of the TARP and the building of a workman pulling the P from Trump off the building. And I hope everybody will spread that far and wide. But, I think it was such an important symbolic continued disintegration of his power, because when dictators or aspiring dictators begin to lose power, their statues topple, their names are pulled off buildings and streets. And that is the trajectory I believe Donald Trump is on right now, although he's going to get more dangerous. He's going to get more reckless. And we still have a hell of a fight on our hands up to and through the midterms. But I continue to believe we're up to the challenge. And I love that you guys, through Defiance, are funding the lawyers who are in court fighting for our rights every day. But we don't pay them. We don't retain them, but they're literally fighting for our right. The Democracy Forwards and the Democracy Defenders Fund and the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Asian Law Caucus. And I hate to start naming them because you're going to leave so many out. But I say, it's great if you want to donate to a political candidate. and I wouldn't discourage people from doing that. But you ought to consider supporting the lawyers who are going into court and fighting our battles every damn day, because without them, we would be in an even tougher spot.
Amen, my friend. Glenn Kirschner, we love to have you on the program, brother. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everything you do. I got to tell you, we got a lot of passionate people out there in pro-democracy land, but there are few folks that are as passionate as Justice Matter, community folks. The Glenn Kirschner community is extremely passionate, extremely pro-democracy, so fired up. We're so grateful for everything you do, my friend. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate what you do.
Thanks, Glenn.
We'll see you soon.
Later, buddy.
Well, we get to round out the program today, Xander, as we always do with our favorite segment, and the segment that we do every day, where we find new members who have joined the Defiance in this country. We like to cover all of our bases, right? We do. We bring politicians into the list. We bring celebrities into that list, regular citizens. However,
odd bedfellows, as they say.
That's right. That's right. But we do have a group that seems to always get some love from our Defiance.org members, and that is animals. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always thought that animals understand far more about the world around us than we give them credit for. They just communicate it in different ways, whether it's a chimpanzee using sign language or a dog barking at a guest who they immediately do not trust, which my dog did today when folks came to do work on our house. Animals always seem to find a way to get that final point across. So this week at the annual Republican Party convention in Texas, a 4-ton African elephant named Paige had her own way of telling the crowd exactly how she felt about the party that has been enabling Donald Trump's abuses of power. Let's take a look.
That's a tough cleanup. Oh, man.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Poetic, Xander, an elephant, the symbol of the GOP, quite literally taking a piss on the party's agenda. Some jokes write themselves, folks.
She didn't ask to be the logo. She didn't want this. It's never part of her plan. I feel bad for her. She got dragged into this.
She got dragged into this, but you know what, Xander? She knew exactly what she was doing. So because of that, we would like to welcome Paige, the pissed off elephant, as the newest and biggest member of the Defiance. She is also now added to the unofficial mascots for this podcast. So Paige, welcome. You're a great elephant. We'd love to have you at one of our future events.
Yeah. I mean, that would make a hell of a No Kings launch, if the Defiance version was led by Paige. It'd be a strong start.
Paige, the pissed off elephant. Love it.
Miles, we didn't get to it. We were talking about the Truman Show with Glenn Kirschner, but I wanted to go back to, with this habeas corpus suspension talk, this idea of us doing some piece of content on what the country would be looking like without the Defiance. Because that's just another great example of, Stephen Miller and Trump are not suspending habeas corpus because something internally is telling them not to. It's because their plans are being thwarted. And there's almost this might be bigger than you and I, I watched that Civil War movie when it came out. And that was kind of a reimagining of this country at war. There's almost a version of this that would be more valuable, which is, America, if Trump has gotten his way so far, we don't even need to invent anything. We don't need to invent any new thing that he hasn't asked for or hasn't new powers that he hasn't been, angling for. This guy already has been fighting for the military to be deployed in your city, for the suspension of due process, for a number of other atrocities. I mean, I thought your idea of going amendment by amendment in our Constitution, showing all the ways in which it's already been, torn up or attempted to be torn up.
Yeah, we were going to do this last week and we fell apart on it, but we should do it because if you just think about the scale and the scope of what they've tried to get away with in the past year, if they hadn't been challenged in the courts, Xander, to your point, there would be millions of people in internment camps in this country. It's not an exaggeration. We're talking the warehouses that they tried to convert into prisons for ICE. Millions of people would have been rounded up, not allowed to challenge their detention in the courts, and deported without due process. and a bunch of them illegally, because the courts have already found that tens of thousands of people arrested by this administration have been arrested illegally, right? So millions of migrants in concentration camps. You would have potentially tens of millions of Americans under federal occupation because they would have kept troops in U.S. cities. Why did Donald Trump pull out of those cities? Because judge after judge ruled that those deployments were unconstitutional. Tens of millions of Americans under federal occupation, and you would have billions of dollars in taxpayer money going out the door to Trump's cronies and to criminals. Like, that's just a sample of what would happen if people in this country had not defied and pushed back. But yeah, we should get that comprehensive list out there because it tells the story big time.
Story 1 and 3 today. Political persecution of his rival, a la Navalny and Putin, going right at the number one candidate against him this upcoming election season and trying to trip him up with some sort of crime. Story number 3, suspension of habeas corpus. Just today, it's a nightmare movie. If we just took the stories from today, it's a nightmare movie. And sometimes I find it challenging to organize my less engaged friends because they are not living in that world. And they don't understand they're not living in that world due to the work of members of the Defiant right here, due to the work of the lawyers that you just mentioned, due to the work of the brave people in Minneapolis and Chicago and all these cities that pushed back and fought back. And so we need something to show people like, look, no BS. This is what he wanted America to look like this month. And so anyways, it's a project I want to work on together with you, with the Defiant, and make sure there's some visualization that everyday Americans can understand.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I have to say, if folks want to do something about all of this, every single week you can count on us saying, join us on Wednesday, because we ain't here just to talk about how scary the news was today or this month. We're here to do something about it. And on Wednesdays, we announce in our weekly mission brief the action that we are taking to fight back. And these aren't just, tip your hat, go sign a petition here. We do real stuff every single week to fight back against these abuses of power. And this week, Xander, to your point about how folks need to wake up, especially before these elections, we have got an effort that we are going to be announcing publicly on Wednesday to do that and to help empower an extraordinary organization to be able to help folks stand up against this when it matters most, and certain groups who it matters to get out there onto the field fighting back against these constitutional violations. So join us for that on Wednesday, friends. Very important. And of course, all of the actions we announce are thanks to defiance.org members. Now, we're in overtime, so we're not going to take questions today. But Xander, even before this Wednesday, we got something else that folks should join tonight if they are around. Tell them what you are hosting this evening, my friend.
Second national call for GTFO ICE. Just in a couple hours here, we're going to be bringing on Michael Riston from Project Saltbox, who is a very important crowdsourcing initiative that we can all engage in to make sure Project Saltbox and their peers has the documents necessary to stay a step ahead of DHS and continue to flag when warehouses and new prison camps are being stood up. So join us. That will be in just, I think, 2 hours here. 2 hours.
2 hours. Yeah, you don't have to
Pacific.
wait until Wednesday to do something. If you want something very real and tangible that you can do to fight back against these warehouse prisons, against Trump's immigration crackdown, in which a lot of his unconstitutional actions are wrapped up, then yeah, you can do that tonight with us in 2 hours. Very excited about that. And for folks who don't know what we're talking about, GTFO ICE stands for Get the Facilities Out ICE. If you have not signed up for that rapid response network, you can do so at gtfoice.org. As Xander noted, we launched that with our partners at the Save America Movement and Project Saltbox. So join Xander tonight for that effort. We will be live on Substack and other platforms. So take a look-see there. In the meantime, friends, we'd love to see you and be on your calendar tomorrow night live at 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll have another great guest. We'll talk about the news of the day. We'll talk about what we're doing about it. And we'll increase the crescendo, Xander, in the lead up to our announcement on Wednesday. And until then, folks, stay loud stay brave, and stay together. We'll see you tomorrow.